As I said at the outset, this is my annual State of the Parish address. It is not a sermon per se, but it certainly is a commentary on the gospel, for we are Jesus' people seeking to live a Jesus life. And as I noted also, this is the 259th year of St. Mark's Church. And during those 259 years, certainly two things have not changed. The first is Jesus. The book of Hebrews says it succinctly when it says, Jesus the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And the second thing that has undoubtedly not changed is that the followers of Jesus are continually seeking a deeper life in Him and a more holy communion with one another, those who gather together, and a greater love for the world. But the rest of the story is about change, 259 years of change, and as the saying goes, the only thing that's constant is change. And we all know that even change is changing as change accelerates. In my opinion, we have come to a place where parish ministry now, in the world and the time that we live in, is a lot like surfing. For those of you who have tried to surf, you know that it takes ability, it takes stability, and it takes agility. It takes ability to set your board at the right spot on the crest of the wave in order to catch the power of the wave. It takes stability to be able to stand on the board, and it takes agility to be able to move the board with the power of the wave. And the same thing is true for parish ministry. It takes the ability of the leadership to place the church on the crest of the wave of the Spirit in people's lives so that what is being offered is meaningful to the things that are breaking into their lives. And it takes financial stability for the ministry to sit upon, and it takes a agility of the whole body to move and pivot as time changes and the needs of people change. And surfing, church, context matters, right? And it's always local. So one of the reasons that you can surf in a particular place is by the shape of the floor below the break of the waves, and local parish churches are in a particular place, in a particular time, with particular people, and it's affected by where it is in the country. We are in the least overtly religious part of the country, as you know. Connecticut ranks 47th on the list of the 50 states as being most religious. And we also know that demographics matter. The difference between a parish church way out in the country where the population is leaving, or in an active suburb or in a city, these demographics really impact the life of a parish church. And yet, just as surfing is affected by things that are far greater than the shelf below the turf, the mega trend of the weather has an enormous effect on surfing, and often weather that has nothing to do with the weather while you're surfing. The same is true for parish churches. We are all affected by the weather of megatrends. We are affected by the economy. We're affected by Sunday morning youth sports. We're affected by the secularization of society. We're affected by the pandemic. We're affected by the mental health crisis and the loneliness epidemic. Those things are not out there. They're in here. They are in our town, and they are in our parish. Now, the waves of change are, of course, constantly changing, and we as a parish community have experienced wildly different surf in the past few years. You may remember in 2019 and early 2020, it was as though we were surfing in a 20-foot wave and we were in the barrel. Those are those great pictures where you see the surfer in the circle of the wave as it's breaking over, shooting through the circle. and we seemed to be on a roll. The topic of the annual address that year was 10 plus 1 things you should know about your church. And that one thing that you should know was that the former presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, Frank Griswold, said to me after his visit here as we were driving to Stamford to put him on the Amtrak back to Philadelphia, he said, "St. Mark's is the most impressive church that I ever visited during my time as a bishop, either as the Bishop of Chicago or as the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church." I remember just being dumbfounded by that and thinking the surf was good. And then in the second week of March, there was a tsunami that started in another land. And a few days later, a storm surge came to us when COVID-19 came to town. And suddenly we were in 100-foot surf as we as a community went into lockdown in our houses. And we as a community were able to pivot with agility immediately. We locked our doors, and the preacher looked directly into that camera. And during those early days of the pandemic and the 100-foot surf, we brought the gospel to people's homes through the digital world and in the word, and we brought it through deed, as many of you shopped for elders in our community. Now, that was a year of pivot with agility. As you remember, we went from the pandemic lockdown to the brutal videoed murder of George Floyd, and we pivoted into talking about race in America today. And then we were forced to pivot yet again in January 6th with the uprising at the Capitol. But like all of that, like seeing a surfer on the face of a huge wave, we as a parish were able to look at ourselves and see the parish on the face of that huge wave. In a crazy way, we as a community thrived during the pandemic, even as our sadness reigned, as Bill Pike, beloved of Kathy and so many of us, was the second person in Connecticut to die of COVID-19. The topic of that address was meeting the moment with love. And now in 2022 and in 2023, we are surfing in choppy waters with many, many cross currents. And the topic of my address this morning is surfing into the future. I'd like to say that there are 3 BCs: before Christ, before the Common Era, and before COVID. In each of these cases, there was a before and there was an after. And COVID has had a major effect on the new reality, the new common era for churches. To give you some sense of this, for all churches, average Sunday physical attendance is down. Many of the lost sheep from the pandemic have not returned. Streaming has become a main form of worship. This is not a passing phase for a difficult time. This is a new reality, and those of us who are joining on the stream this morning are very devout, and they are very devoted to us. It's just that they're not physically with us right now, and I'm deeply touched by these people. Digital ministry is a big deal, and it's getting bigger. Financing the ministry is more difficult. Pastoral care needs are increasing, and they are more complex. Volunteerism is way down. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Political polarization in the country makes it harder and harder for us to have a big tent church gathered around Jesus. There is an immense clergy shortage. Many churches in the United States cannot find a clergy person, no matter how many phone calls they make. Talented clergy are much in demand. There is an epidemic of clergy burnout. The people of our gathered vocation are dropping like flies. This is the reality of churches in the New Common Era. Now, I want to point toward three big vital signs for us as a community in 2022. The first is growth. We at St. Mark's have grown for each of the 14 years in a row. We have grown each year. Only a very, very small percentage of Episcopal churches can say the same. In fact, churches anywhere can say the same. During that period, by comparison, the Episcopal Church shrunk by a third, and the Diocese of Connecticut shrunk by a quarter. We track on more than 1,700 people, and many more than that are tracking on us. The second vital sign that I'd like to point toward is we are growing younger. The average age of an Episcopalian in the United States is 65 years old. That is not anywhere near true for us. We have been getting younger and younger and younger for years. Do not be fooled by what you read about millennials in church. It's simply not true. They do not have disinterest in religion. We have a very large passel of millennials in our generation, and they bring their kids. Our nursery is packed with life. It's a major energy center for us. We get a glimpse of other great movements of the kids. How about when the Meet in the Middle kids read the lectern from the lectern for us? It moves all of our hearts. Jan Maines, our director of children's ministry, is called from churches near and far to ask what is her secret for bringing kids to church. The third vital sign I'd like to point toward is that last year we completed the Inspired by Love Capital and Endowment Campaign. At $7.5 million, it was the largest campaign in memory, and it was more than even our consultants said we had any shot of raising. I wish you could all be me and to have heard what I heard and to see what I saw. For me, the campaign was so empowering and so faith-building. It was sacramental. It represented the outward manifestation of the inward spiritual grace of each and all of you. I wish you could have heard how over and over and over people gave their money to the church out of love of the Lord and love of this place. It was so inspiring. It was shocking. And I wish you could have heard the weekly phone calls from the inspirational group of lay people that led the campaign. Their love for the Lord and their love for all of you is beyond your guessing, as they did everything they could to make sure that we could raise this money. In the surfing analogy, what that campaign was about was to give us stability for the ministry to stand on. In a few years, when those proceeds are fully given and integrated into the endowment, they will make a major change in our life together. In the capital funds that were given, you can see evidence of that right in front of you with the scaffolding and the cleaning of the reredos. One of the major cross-currents that we're facing in 2023 is that in spite of the success of the capital and the endowment campaign, we are facing the largest budget deficit that we have faced during my now working on 15 years here. It's like the beginning of the Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, the worst of times. The gap is currently $250,000, and we knew this was coming. The reason that we knew that was two very generous families gave $350,000, the so-called clergy gift that allowed us to have 3 clergy. That gift seemed to keep going way beyond its life, kind of like the Hanukkah candles. It burned and it burned, but now Hanukkah is over. The gift is done. This was the very purpose of the Inspired by Love endowment campaign. It was to make up that gap, but we are unable to make up that gap because we have not yet received all of the money paid in to the endowment, and moreover, our spending policy titrates the way those funds will come to us. In other words, we have a big gap this year, and I'm sure we will have another gap next year, and I'm not quite sure of the third year, but we will continue to have these gaps if our giving pattern if it remains the same. Now, as many of you know, we have been speaking about this. A video went out of me speaking from my desk, and then we sent out a video of Stan Twardy, our senior warden, speaking from the lectern. These communiques worked. In that period, we received, hard for me to guess, but it's in the realm of $130,000 plus $40,000, as people heard the message that we need more. One family in particular who are streaming with us this morning, and God bless you and thank you, I send thanks to you from all of us, made a very, very large and generous one-time gift to try to close that gap. It is a very big deal. It's going to take all of us to close this gap. Now, the problem with being under-resourced is that the size of the staff cannot sustain growth in the ministry. This is a little bit like watching somebody get on their surfboard and it looks like they're on a roll and all of a sudden they flip off and are plunging down headlong. During my time here, the size of St. Mark's has essentially doubled, but the size of the staff remains the same. As Father Justin said in one of our meetings recently, the sponge is full. Now, I'm going to add to that the staff that we have is beyond excellent. There are other great staffs in churches around the country, but there is no better staff than the one that we have here. And I want you also to know that we have excellent, excellent lay leadership. You would be very inspired by the conversation that takes place at the vestry level as the vestry wrestles with the issues that face us. Now, moreover, our budget, it doesn't have fat in it. During the past few years, the money that we spend on non-people, not on our people, but on the ministry that is not people, has actually gone down. There is not a way for us to cut our way to balancing the budget. Now, these resources support a ministry that has extraordinary return on capital. It is meaningful beyond words. It makes the soul meaning in so many people's lives, S-O-U-L meaning. I mean, you're all here today, and in Connecticut, I just have to say, that's a big deal that you came to church, and wherever you are, that you are streaming with us, because a lot of America does not choose to join in with the life of a religious community. We know from research that the two key ways for spiritual growth in the Christian tradition are to stay close to Jesus and stay close to the Bible. And it is because of that we created the Revved Up for Sunday podcast, in which Justin, Elizabeth, and Peter reflect on the gospel for the coming Sunday. This podcast reaches far more people than could ever gather together in Morrill Hall on Sunday morning for Bible study. This podcast reaches into homes far and wide. You would be dumbfounded by the people who don't miss this podcast. People who haven't been in this church in years. I bump into them in the grocery store and like, bro, man, I never ever missed that podcast. I know people who've said that podcast has brought them back to Jesus. They had left religion until they stumbled on the podcast. That podcast goes not only to our 25-mile radius, it goes around the country and even overseas. The purpose of this is to be like that surfer who shifts in the agility into the wave, the new wave, to catch the crest of the wave. That's what the podcast is. And in order to bring people closer to the living Christ, which is what our heart's business is all about, in the fall, 38 of us are going to go to the Holy Land to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. Now, people keep coming and they keep turning toward us, in part because they need a community of love in a broken world. It's a crazy world out there. It's an unloving place out there. They need to gather as a community of love. We need to gather. We are a new commandment community. We are that ecclesia that Paul is talking about, St. Paul the Apostle is talking about in his letters. Ecclesia was a new term for everybody being equal in Christ no matter who you are. And our pastoral ministry, which is a gold standard in the Episcopal Church, really seeks to love as Jesus loves. People turn to us They turn to us when their husband dies. And they need help. They turn to us for a funeral when their daughter dies. They turn to us for our burial grounds. This year, we are buried a kid who was stillborn, in a niche so that the parents can have their remains on the top of the child after they bury. We're about to bury a kid who died of ALS at 2 months. People turn to us for weddings so that they can feel that the blessing of God is in their union. They turn to us for baptisms in the water of life. They turn to us when they get back from the hospital and they're so tired they can't cook and they just want the comfort food of a casserole. They turn to us for companionship when they're lonely and their kids live out of town. Last year we sent 330 times Margaret Roscoe showed up at somebody's house to give flowers. Phone calls, food. People turn to us when they don't know what to do. They turn to us in tragedy. I got a call Friday morning. A young dad was at jiu-jitsu. He got kicked and he died. People turn to us when their kid dies. And they turn to us for prayer. Our prayer list is long. And it gets longer. We actually try to make it shorter. It's not possible. People just keep calling. Please pray for my brother. And that's only the top of the iceberg. There's a longer prayer list that is prayed daily by others. And people turn to us for money. If you've ever heard of the social safety net, forget it. There is no social safety net. It's called a waiting list that never ends. People turn to us so that they don't fall into the abyss of homelessness. They turn to us for money for heating, fuel, or rent, or a car payment, or a doctor visit. People turn to us when their child has depression and gets booted out of boarding school or college. They turn to us because they know they have a shot at Jesus' love, the type of love that is accepting and willing to help when everybody else rejects them. And through this, in the ministry of the church, Jesus is still reaching out to the hungry, to those on the margins, to the lost, and to the lonely, and to the hurting. And like Nicodemus, who came to Jesus at night, much of this happens outside the glare of another person's gaze. I mean, who wants to be seen as hurting and broken and in great need? It's shame-making in our culture to be hurting and broken and in need. One of the hidden ministries we have is Francis the Pastoral Pup. There are many incredible stories about Francis. I'll share just one. A young man in an acute care unit said he was there against his will, resisted interacting with Francis, and when told that Francis likes making home and hospital visits, he said, "How do you know? Did she tell you? You have a talking dog? Our handler said, well, she communicates non-verbally. And he said, give me an example. And she said, look into her eyes. He looked into Frances's face, then pet her head, her back, and finally hugged her. And then when the visit was over, he said, I feel her taking my negative energy. I like that she doesn't talk back or judge me. Where are you from again? She said, St. Mark's Church. And he said, I thought the church was becoming irrelevant, but now I see this. We reach out into the woes of the world. We invest in the community. We hosted Mayfair, the Ministry of Fun, last year for the first time in 3 years, and it was a Herculean effort by Dave Shea and George Wright and by all those who contributed to that. We give 12% of our financial resources away. That's nearly $300,000. We open our doors to the community for meetings. We host the community food pantry. We have the Gospel Garden, which has grown 14 tons of organic vegetables over the last 14 years. That's 14 tons of organic love. It's too much just to feed the hungry of New Canaan. It goes to Darien and then into the food bank and may reach as far as Bridgeport. And this year, we're coming on the 5th anniversary of Laundry Love. We respect the dignity of every human being by helping them to have clothes that are clean so they don't have to smell. And we continue with our anti-racism work. Even when there are some that just say it is politically correct wokeness, we lean into the need for racial healing in our country. We collect diapers and food and backpacks and more stuff. And all of these ministries find their center here in our worship to the Lord in the beauty of holiness. We are so blessed. Liturgy means work of the people, and we were so blessed that so many of you contribute so much to make this liturgy go. We are unbelievably blessed to have Justin and Elizabeth preaching to us on a regular basis. They're not just two of the best associate clergy in the United States. They're two of the best clergy in the United States. We also are blessed to have our maestro, Ned, who is known throughout the world as a gifted musician who has a vocation to lead others in making music to the glory of God. Through Ned's leadership, the choirs that were so decimated during the pandemic and have been rebuilt, and we're grateful to all those who are seated behind me for the work they do. In order to worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness, we are refurbishing and burnishing the iconic centerpiece of our life together, the reredos. The reredos was cleaned 25 years ago, but this is the first time since the church was built that the reredos is being renovated and refurbished to its original vibrancy and glory. As part of that renovation, we're going to photograph each of the pieces so that when my sermon never ends, you can go on your phone and press on that piece and find out what it means. And then in the spring, we're going to remove the acrylic covering from the resurrection window so that its blaze of glory, which the resurrection is, can shine more strongly upon us. And we thank Jill, and we thank the members, Jill Sekoulis and the members of the property committee for all of their work. It's amazing work. And now as I come to finish up, I want to tell you that we are making a major move this year, a major surfing move to put our board on a different spot on the wave, the digital wave. We're going to reposition the church in this world of digital ministry so that we can make sure that in the very, very loud marketplace of attention and digital noise, the gospel can be heard, and we can communicate not only with all of you, but with people around the world. During the past year, the staff worked incredibly hard to articulate our needs, our digital needs, and then working in conjunction with what I like to call the Privy Council. Those are digitally savvy parishioners, and with the vestry, we have hired a New York firm to redo and renew our digital life together. I want you to be very, very clear that there is no future for a church that does not launch wholeheartedly into digital ministry. Imagine a digital native saying that you were going to take a pass on the digital ministry. It would be like taking a pass on existing. You would simply disappear. Remaining in business for 259 years has not been a no-brainer for the people of our parish, and it will not be a no-brainer for those in the future. We need to continually make moves to catch the wave of the Spirit and the wave of people's lives as it is. And you should also know that in surfing, you need to take risks. You need to be just a milli-inch ahead of that break in order to catch the power of the wave. And that is what we are seeking to do with our digital ministry and with our whole life together. And now as I finish up, I want you to know that we take care of people who are just being born. There is somebody in our church who I believe is being born right now as we are speaking. And today, I believe, is Edith Linger's 102nd birthday. Edith has been Patty's mom. Yay! Edith, I hope you can hear this. So Edith, as a streamer, happy birthday, and she was born in 1923. She's been a member here ever since. Imagine all of the change that she has seen, and I have no doubt that if she could speak, she would say two things. One, I love you, I love this church, and I know we can do it together as we face the future.